Now, on asylum seekers and the boats, I talked about green shoots before, at least Chris Uhlmann did, but there might have been more than the odd green shoot starting to emerge now on this issue. When you look at the evidence from the ground that the asylum seekers themselves are talking about this, and they understand it, and they just might decide it's not worth the risk.
Yeah, well, Malaysia, you know, and there's been a lot of criticism this week of Malaysia and the way they treat asylum seekers and the lack of rights that asylum seekers have in Malaysia. Now, people who are trying to get on boats to come to Australia know that, and I think they would rather sort of hang out in Indonesia and work out a way to get to Australia than be sent to Malaysia. And I think that message is starting to get around. I don't think it was very well handled in the first place, the way the government announced it and tried to explain it, and it's still not a done deal with Malaysia, but I think there is a bit of a message there, and the government is hoping that, well, they've budgeted for 750 arrivals this year, which is a huge drop from last year, and interestingly, it's the same number that the Howard government budgeted for in the first year after the Tampa. That's what they're aiming for. They're aiming for that sort of reduction.
Well, if it is reduced to those sort of numbers, it's not the issue it is right at the moment.
The other great irony of the week, though, was that you had human rights advocates actually saying Nauru was a more humane system than Malaysia, for the simple reason that when the Howard government had the Nauru facility, we ran it. It was our people who looked after the refugee seekers there. Basically it was an Australian facility.
Well, we'll go to that because the human rights, the High Commissioner for Human Rights was here during the week. She was critical of, she was, for a start, said to politicians on all sides, stop demonising the issue. Spoke out against mandatory detention, and then she said she was unhappy with the idea of sending people back to Malaysia where they might not be treated as well as they would be in Australia. We'll have a listen to this.
The government responded to this by informing me that the agreement will include written undertakings to protect asylum seekers. However, in my view, assurances are not a sufficient protection. There is concern by the international community on where Australia is going with its treatment of asylum seekers, with following a policy of mandatory detention.
On the other hand, the United Nations spokesman from the refugee
UNHCR.
Yeah, the UNHCR had a more positive approach towards the thing.
They did, and they did because they are trying to work in Malaysia. They need to have a presence on the ground in those countries that have those huge populations of basically stranded refugees, basically. There's 94,000 of them or something in Malaysia. So they like the idea. This is the closest we seem to be getting to something approaching a regional solution, which is countries agreeing to help those countries where all the refugees are pooled, in a sense, taking more, trying to relieve that burden of processed refugees and getting an orderly progression. The problem of it is we can't really guarantee the treatment of the 800 we send there, and that is the problem for human rights activists. It will always be a problem, like mandatory detention is always a problem.
You say it's a problem for human rights activists. The opposition and Scott Morrison this week, they're almost just sort of reinventing themselves now in this sense that they're now raising this kind of human rights issues as well. Let's listen to Scott Morrison.
I'll give this guarantee. Anyone who is sent to Nauru will not be caned. I can give that absolutely and clearly. I challenge the Minister to give that same guarantee when it comes to the 800 people, including children, that he's going to send to Malaysia.
There's a sort of role reversal going on here, isn't there? But, I mean, what we're seeing is that human rights advocates, as the Gillard government edges towards a more effective policy on boat people, are now lining up to criticise the Gillard government.
But Scott Morrison, he's sort of playing this magnificent sort of double political wedge.
Yes.
He's talking up the asylum seeker problem, which causes Labor problems with its voter base in the suburbs, and then he's talking about the fact that these people are going to be sent off to Malaysia where they could be caned, which causes Labor problems with its inner city voter base. I mean, it's a marvellous piece.
Doesn't it all add up? Haven't we actually moved a long way in a few short months to accepting offshore detention as a deterrent for the boats. I mean, that's where it shifted to. It started off as it doesn't work, we won't do it, we won't do it.
Now the only question is which offshore setup.
And now the only question is this closer to a regional solution? We're actually doing some good by taking those 4,000 from the front of the queue.
Well, Chris Bowen, who has the carriage of the issue day in and day out, seems to have a spring in his step on the issue. He's certainly fired up in the Parliament. Here he is.
I understand, Mr Speaker, that the opposition is devastated that the government has reached an international agreement to break the people smugglers' business model at the same time as increasing our humanitarian intake, Mr Speaker. I understand their sensitivity, but they'll be disappointed, Mr Speaker, as we continue to implement this innovative and bold arrangement.
So, is there a mood change? Seems to be.
Well, the key question is what's Scott Morrison going to talk about if they do stop the boats?